Next we'll move on to Baker Tilley. Give us an update on jail funding.
Okay. Take one. I'll let those get down the row. So I was asked to come and give an update since we do have kind of new numbers. It's been, I think, a couple of years since we were here. At least it's a year and a half. It's been a while. So it's been
prior to inflation when you were here.
Well, yeah, we talked about inflation then, and now we've seen it, and there's rates have changed. Lots gone on since the last time we were here. But where we're at now, kind of what the timing is, we have new estimates on the jail, and if you have any specifics on cost estimates, things like that, Eric Wefflin is here to answer those questions. I'll go through the information that is based upon what he has given us, and what we've gone through and restructured the bonds from where we were at before. And we've got a couple of scenarios that we're going to go through. So the first scenario that we'll go through is really based upon the current estimate. You know, where are we at? Similar financing that we talked about before, where the correctional lit is going to pay the debt service on the bonds. And then the public safety lit would also be pledged to it, but really acting more as a coverage under this to help us when we market the bonds. And then, as we talked also before, having the property tax backup put on the bonds for the ultimate security. And that helps us not have to have a debt service reserve. If we have the property tax backup on it, if we have to have a reserve, that would add basically 1 year's worth of debt payments to the cost of the project. And you've got a lot of revenue before you'd ever get to that property tax. There really is there for rating purposes and marketability. I can't tell you never have to use it, but you've got 200% coverage. So before you would get to that, you've got it, your income taxes would have to be half of what they are before you'd even have to, you know, levy for $1, let alone, you know, a large portion of it. So that really, it's a mechanism that most people will utilize when financing something like this. Is having that ability to have that, because it does help you on your rating and marketability of the bonds. In addition to those revenue sources paying the debt service, we do have funds on hand from the correctional lit that would go into the project, as well as utilizing the lit over the next 3 years, 24, 25, and 26, while the jail's under construction and we can't make debt payments, lease payments, because you don't have a jail yet that you're operating and using. So during that period of time, you can't make payments. And so we've also built that into this model as well. And then also under this scenario, we put in about $6 million of ARPA funds to help fund that gap as well. And then I want to hit, and then we're going to go through kind of the cost numbers on the right. And then the other item I want to note is that, as I mentioned on the public safety lit, when we put the correctional, when you put the correctional lit in place, also increased the public safety lit. And at that point in time, 0.15% was discussed as going towards the jail or helping with jail costs. That's about $1.7 million. And as I mentioned, under this scenario, it's not going to pay debt service, but it is there for if there's additional jail operational costs, or it could go to other costs as well once we, you know, finance the project. So I just wanted to put that on this schedule so you can see that. On the right-hand side of the schedule is the breakdown of where current estimate is at for cost for the project, and then taking those funding pieces that I mentioned, how that all flows together. Current estimate for hard costs is about $84 million. There are a couple of contingencies that add another $8 million. You know, during the estimate process, you want to have design contingency, construction contingency. That's what makes up that $8 million line item. Soft cost is about $9.8 million. That's for design, architect fees, furniture, fixtures, equipment, those types of costs. And if you want great detail on that, Eric's definitely your man to talk about that. The capitalized interest, which I hit on, that's for the interest payments. Bondholders are going to want to have interest payments coming in. So we have to have funds set aside at closing to make those payments during those early years. And then the last line item, about $680,000, is for underwriting and cost of issuance. Grand total is about $110.5 million, all in, for our current estimate. That is funded through the issuance of about $75.8 million of bonds. And over the next 3 years, plus the current balance, is about $28.6 million from the correctional lit. And then, as I mentioned, about $6 million from ARPA funds. So those are the different pieces that we pulled together for this example for the funding. The next page, sometimes people like to see graphs. So this next page shows you comparison of the debt payments to the different revenue sources that I mentioned. So kind of going from left to right. The green and the red portion, that represents those cash contributions that I talked about. So the green portion would be the correctional lit coming in, 24, 25, 26. And then the red portion is the ARPA funds. Now those funds are already here. I just layered it out over 3 years, but we're flexible in how that gets paid out. That's going to depend on draw schedule and actual timing for the money needed. The blue portion in the background represents the correctional lit, and that's your 2024 certified shares. We made no adjustments for that number to go up or down, or we've just held it flat and constant. The gray portion represents 0.15% of the public safety lit, and then the yellowish portion is the remainder of your public safety lit, which is 0.4%. And then the purple portion, the stacked or the columns, is the actual debt service payments, which you can see we've structured that to pretty much match up to your correctional facilities lit amount, and then the gray and the yellow are simply the coverage on top of that. Any questions on that one scenario? And then we can have questions at the end as well. Yes, sir.
Is any of these three that you have, and maybe Eric can answer this, is this with the build out of the extra beds to the jail to make this, or no?
This is base bid.
So this is not with the build out with an extra cell?
Eric Westland, owner's representative for the county. This is for base bid, which does not include the section of the southern pod that is available to be built out.
Do we have a price on that if that was?
We do. It was included in the estimate. I want to say it was north of $8 million to build out the rest of that pod. But I can verify that and give you that information.
So this is not with the extra build out? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So basically what you're saying here is the purple represents the money that we would have to be paying, we would be paying on the bond,
Correct.
correct? And that pretty much matches what, when you take that bond over this period of time, that's the blue, correct?
Yes.
And then the gray and the yellow or gold or whatever is just in case we needed additional funding, depending on if that fluctuated.
Correct. That would help to fill that in. So those numbers are available for other purposes.
So right now with the bond that you're looking at 84 million, correct? I'm sorry, that's not right. I said that wrong. It's 75.8 million?
Yes.
And what were we originally approved for? Was it like 88 million for the bond?
We never officially took out the bond. We're estimate, but we never officially did.
Right, we were given estimated numbers.
In that,
Yeah, no, I think it was probably closer to
I think it was 89.
I thought the cost was 89, the bond was probably 60, mid-60s.
Right. We just never officially, we don't take that out, I believe, until it starts being actually built.
Yeah, we had no legal documents or the process, and it never started.
One more question for Eric. Sorry, Eric. I hate to keep it. Right now, with everything goes smooth, these are the numbers, correct? If we stay on schedule and we build this jail, if something got burgered up, how much of these numbers go up? Say if it gets delayed another 6 months or 12 months, how much does this go up? I don't want exact numbers. Just as
So first, I'm not the construction manager, so I would defer to them. They're the ones that would bid the project. I can tell you that what we've seen from a market standpoint, based on some other projects in the state, that there's been a stabilization. There's not quite the escalation that you saw for the last 3 years. I don't have those numbers because I'm not a contractor, but I can certainly get those for you. I would say that when you say these are the numbers, these are estimates based on a construction manager who builds, in the last 10 years, 90% of the jails in the state, so they've got a lot of experience and expertise. So they know what they're talking about in terms of these hard costs. However, we won't know the cost until bid day. There's still an official bid process that will be undertaken, and the cost of the project on bid day. Until then, it's always an estimate.
And it's probably not gonna go down, it's probably gonna go up. I mean, because how things are.
I don't know that. What I do know is that there was a project that was bid in Warwick County a week and a half ago, and it came in under budget.
Councilwoman North, did you have follow-up?
I did. So they're looking at right now, I guess this is kind of maybe a question for you. So they're looking at doing a pod and a half, correct?
It's a little bit more than that, but essentially, yes. I mean, it's building out one pod completely and then building out a portion of a second pod.
Okay.
As base bid.
Right. And
Yep.
then in that scenario, what we're looking at, how much of that is cells and how much of that is, dormitory style housing?
So of the 525 proposed rated beds in the facility, there are 72 per pod that would be dormitory.
So
150.
144 beds?
Yeah, and I can get those exact numbers. I've got that information with me. I just don't have it sitting up here in front of me.
Okay, and so I was doing some research today because I like to know what's going on sometimes, but I was just reading in the Administrative Code Title 210, and it talks about the square footage that's required for dormitory style housing, which is 50 square feet per person.
Mhm.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the portion that you're looking at for that, I think it's like a 32 bed or 32 person and like a 42 person, something like that. Or
It's a 40 and a 32.
okay, I knew one was 2, I just wasn't sure which one. So in that little triangle that they're looking at doing that dormitory style housing, does that meet that requirement as far as the square footage?
Yeah, they meet ACA standards and they meet code, absolutely. And there's also a fixture count requirement for the number of people that you can put in a space. So for instance, if you have 40 people in a space, then you would need to have 1 to 12 number of fixtures. So for toilets or
Right.
showers. So all of those requirements are being met from a design standard standpoint.
And then I know also there's the issue of, let me see here. I just got lost here for a minute. The classification. So I know that's a big issue with the jail is the classification, like now is what we have a problem. So even though you have that many beds, you can't always utilize the beds because of classification. So when you're putting that many people into one section in a dormitory style housing, I mean, because like right now I know we've got MCCC that's got like 3 different areas for dormitory style housing. And right now, the people that are in there, the low level felonies, that's never really what it was intended for. But we get away with it because it's not a jail and it doesn't follow underneath those ramifications or the procedure, the rules that is for the jail. So when we start looking at a jail and doing a dormitory style housing, now we're dealing with classifications as well, and I don't know how usable that space is going to be. I'm just questioning how usable that is, because I know the sheriff's not in favor of that so much as it'd be one thing if they were still building out the entire jail, or that we had more beds available to be able to do that. Because I know I've toured MCCC and it is not a good environment. It's not safe for the employees. It's not safe for the people that are in there. I think a lot of the judges would agree with that argument as well. So I'm just questioning the thought of putting that many dormitory style housing in there.
Okay, and I'm happy to give you my perspective. I'm not a jail commander. I don't operate a jail facility. What I can tell you is that of the 25 plus-ish classifications in the new facility that's being proposed, only 4 are dormitory. So 20 plus of those classifications have cells. I'll let the sheriff speak for himself and let the jail commander speak to the operations of a facility. I think what I can say is that the new facility provides a lot more flexibility than what they've ever had to manage. And with that comes the opportunity for proper classification. And to your point, you don't always have the perfect mix of people to fill every bed in there. That's understood. But that's why there are so many different classifications. The other thing is that one of the things that they don't have right now is dedicated medical, dedicated mental health. There's even space in this proposed facility for acute mentally ill people to be housed, which is significantly different than what they're dealing with today. Right now, they use space essentially in intake and booking for things like that are adjacent to that. So, I mean, there's a significant improvement, and I'd be happy to sit down with the plans and review kind of the strategy for the design as it is.
Well, I mean, I've toured a jail that was just built in, I believe it was Hendricks County, and it is an amazing area, amazing jail, I guess, for jail. And so I can understand what you're saying. We've already got a facility that has that dormitory style housing, and I'm just curious what our thought process is of using that facility, what that's going to be used for when we're putting dormitory in the jail as well.
So the intent for MCCC is for it to be used for low-level offenders. That, and in fact, I was working on that today with the jail commander and the assistant jail commander. One of the exercises that we just initiated the other day, and we're looking at opportunities to take snapshots as we continue through the design process. I asked her to take, typically there's around 395 to 400 people that are in custody by Madison County any given month. And so I requested that they take that 400 snapshot and classify that in an ideal situation as if there wasn't a facility. And I just got those numbers today and actually had a meeting at the jail today and started to go through that information. So I'll have more to report on that, but that information is being collected. And one of the things that we looked at was, you know, who's an MCCC that wouldn't be if given a different facility. And, you know, right now they're in dormitory space, but if we had more cells, you know, where would they be housed? So that exercise is being done, and we're looking at that, and had a really good conversation today about it. So be happy to report the feedback on that.
I'm going to steer us back to Brian's report. I mean, I think a lot of this is good discussion because it will impact the funding of the jail and the cost of the jail if there are adjustments like that need to be made. But I want us to focus on kind of what our starting point is, because obviously any change in that design would likely mean that these numbers would go up, I would assume. So, Brian, if you want to continue on.
Okay. So scenario 2, couple little changes on this from the first scenario that I'll highlight. So under this scenario, in addition to the correctional lit being used for debt payment, we took half of that 0.15% that I talked about previously and used that for debt payments. So that's the change on this schedule. The remaining public safety lit also is coverage, and then the same thing with the property tax backup. Cash contributions under this model is just the correctional lit. By going this structure, we did not have to use the ARPA funds that I talked about on the prior schedule. That still leaves about $860,000 annually from the remainder of that portion that could be used for operational costs or other costs as well. And then on the right portion of that schedule, one item that also changed was going this route ended up raising about $3.2 million of additional proceeds. So when we start talking about, we've got an estimate or there's options that you may want to add in. You know, one thing you could do if it was that additional $8 million, you've got $3 million here from the bond proceeds, and you've got the $6 million in ARPA that we had in the first scenario that we pulled off. So there's, as Ben said, this is kind of a starting point. So there's just kind of a couple different models that we wanted to show, kind of how we're starting to look at funding the project.
So basically what you're saying is that 3.2 in the ARPA funds, we could look at possibly funding the $8 million additional for the remainder of the pot.
Correct, yeah. Obviously those are all estimates still, but I mean that, if it came in as the estimates, you know, that's kind of how you could look at that.
And then the trade-off for doing so, just trying to kind of make sense of this.
A little more interest.
Yeah, we'd be paying a little more interest over the term of
Correct.
bonds.
Yeah, so you're issuing bonds now of 86 million as opposed to
Yeah,
75.
right.
And each year your payment is $860,000 higher than it was because, you know, a portion of that is going to this. The coverage is 175% instead of 200%. Still extremely strong coverage. Usually the threshold is 125. So you're significantly ahead of that level. Those are some of the trade-offs.
That may prevent 5-10 years down the road, whoever's on the council at that point having to find funding for the build out of that pod too. So, you know, it may be money that would be spent anyway as the need for more beds grew. So.
Yeah, and you know, and if we didn't use it in the structure, that money could sit there and could accumulate also, and you could come back in 2, 3, 4, 5 years and use those funds at that time. But as we've seen, the cost to do that most likely at that point is going to be higher than it is today.
Also, one question. I see the ARPA estimates, and you're saying this is estimates. I get that. I mean, we went through a whole year and haven't heard anything, and I'm concerned about the ARPA. I understand how the process is, and unless something changed, and you're saying, I see these figures, but if we don't have this submitted by the end of 24, and the federal government, this could change. Is that correct?
Correct. So in reality, you probably would want to, you know, where I show the ARPA and that first scenario spread over 3 years, you're going to want to probably spend those dollars first, just given the rules with it. And then the correctional could accumulate. Or you just have more up front, and that, you know, some of that would fill in with the curve as far as
this concrete estimation. My concern is when the next, I mean, you're really not going to do another, guess you said these are estimations, I hear that, but now we're in March. We're going to have it, when are we going to have a different update or something that you're going to come up with and do that more we get closer to building it?
So the bids, my understanding, the bids are anticipated to be due in June, early June.
Okay.
Our issuance for the bond is in July.
Okay.
So, and we actually brought me to a point that I should have started with also, is timing. So really, to get to that July date, action will start in April. So the commissioners will probably be back here to the council in April to get that process started, going down the approvals. So, and also when you see that, as you know, whenever we do a bond resolution or a lease, you know, we're going to build in cushion above the estimates. Because what we can't do is have that estimate come in $1 million high. We were right on top of that estimate, and you have to start the process over. And then it delays you 3 more months out. And then the next time we talk is $3 million higher. So, you know, we'll have some height in it, you know, some cushion in it. It'll authorize, you know, the use of funds. So, and then once we get the estimates is when we can decide, do we want to use $6 million of ARPA? Do you want to use more ARPA funds? Have a smaller bond issue? So those are some of the points that we still have flexibility on. And we'll try to build in flexibility as we go forward.
Once bids come in, things start moving pretty quickly, basically.
Yeah, and we'll be, you know, in the process, going to Standard & Poor's, getting the rating, going through that process. So once the bids come in, we can true everything up and then hit those dates in July. So I mean, we're at that point where it'll start picking up now because of just where the estimates are at. It's much further along than at any point before.
Big different estimate from a year and a half ago. I can tell you it jumped from 87 to this.
Oh, it's an eye opener. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely. But you know, we've seen countless projects where people shelved it 3-4 years ago, and then you know they came back. You're not, unfortunately, you're not unique in that regard. Final schedule just shows the same comparison. The only difference you'll see is I pulled off there's no ARPA funds showing up on this schedule, and now the purple goes into the gray because a portion of that gray is being used for debt service.
So you think, based upon this, though, that we do, financially, you think that we're at a place where we could possibly look at funding the $8 million to finish the other pod?
I mean, there's a way that we can get there. Yeah, if you want to use the ARPA funds, and I put $6 million in. I mean, we could have a conversation because I wasn't sure what else ARPA is going towards at this point in time, what you've obligated. If the desire is to put more ARPA funds into it, we can add that in as well. But if we just use the $6 million ARPA and then went kind of that second route, I mean, that's $9 million.
Well, and I know we're getting ready to put $2.5 million in our rainy day fund today. So I think that we as a council can also consider utilizing some of those funds to be able to pay maybe some of that down as well.
Point. That is a good point.
Yeah, I will say that using the ARPA funds, probably where I would start with, just because as we go through the rating process, having the kind of larger rainy day fund there, that shows a lot of flexibility if something does happen down the road. Whereas the ARPA funds are finite. That's a set amount. You have a time limit on when you have to use those funds.
In the 24, you gotta have that submitted.
Yeah.
I do just want to remind the council that even though we have $19 million in the ARPA fund account, a large portion of that money has already been earmarked for other projects, so has been set aside. And some of those projects are already in motion and happening at this time. The money just hasn't been spent yet, so just need to be aware of that.
Councilman Murray, not appropriated already last year we did?
I'm sorry.
We already appropriated, but this is with interest building on top of that. So that's already been appropriated out of this balance.
Well,
It hasn't been taken out. Appropriation doesn't mean it's taken out, right?
Right.
So it's still in the account. It has not been spent yet, so.
And I can work with Rick to get kind of a better idea on, kind of what is the range potentially of ARPA funds.
And as a reminder, it's the commissioners that oversee the ARPA funds as well, not the council. So we'd have to get the commissioners on board to make those types of decisions.
Well, I'm assuming that if you brought it to us that way, that you've had some conversation with them about that, I would assume. But,
Not officially, but yeah, I mean,
Okay.
it was brought up here.
Okay.
My question was, when I heard the number, what other funding sources do we have to look at? And so it was correctional and then looking at ARPA as well.
Councilman Emery, do you know how much of the ARPA funds have already been, not appropriated, but earmarked?
I've heard those numbers, but I don't know that. No, I do not. I'm sure the commissioners could get that to you. We can provide that, I'm sure.
So we'll double check on that.
Councilman Gill, I do need, if you allow me a little attitude here, I need to ask one important question to Eric. I know you don't want,
as long as it's on the topic.
well, it's planning to the future of it, and I'm concerned about this. I've talked to other counties involved in the project, so it's very important to
Okay,
this.
if it's pertinent to this topic.
Well, yeah, it's when a jail under the DOC standards. Would you explain this to the council? Because this is a very huge project. We open that jail. What is the DOG standards? Is it an 80% full? If we don't build up, what is the DOG standards? Because I read those. Can you just interpret a general statement to that? Once we open that facility, whatever bed, what does DOG count that? At
DOC
80% or
is-
DOC standard, whatever.
Yep. So I'm not familiar with a DOC standard. What the DOC has said is that you should consider 80% threshold for classification. You're never going to have the perfect mix of people to be housed in a facility so that you have every bed full and be able to classify to the standard that you want to. So that's a threshold that is used for planning. It's a threshold that's talked about. It's not code. It's not the law. It doesn't refer to anything from a rated capacity standpoint. The rated capacity for a facility means how many beds can you occupy in that facility. That doesn't take into account classification. So two different things, but two things that are critical to the operations of a facility.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you both very much. Sure we'll be
We'll be back.
talking more. So.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next